Here's a strange power in silence that most people never discover. We live in a world overflowing with noise. Opinions shouted online, rushed conversations, endless justifications. And yet, it's often the quiet ones who hold the most influence. They don't speak to fill the air. They speak with purpose, and sometimes not at all. Because when you learn to control what you say, you're not just managing your mouth, you're mastering your mind. You see, the person who can remain calm in the face of chaos, who doesn't react impulsively, who chooses their words with care, that person becomes unshakable. And it's not about pretending to be wise or acting superior. It's about reclaiming your energy, protecting your peace, and refusing to let the world pull your strings like a puppet. Stoicism teaches us that speech is not just communication, it's action. It's a reflection of the soul. Words are not harmless. They build or destroy. They invite trust or provoke doubt. They can start wars or bring healing. That's why the Stoics warned, be silent most of the time, or say only what is necessary. So today we're going to explore something deeper than just talking less. We're going to explore how to speak with power, how to control the urge to over-explain, how to discipline your speech so that it aligns with who you really are, not with who the world pressures you to be. If you've ever said something and immediately regretted it, if you've ever felt like you talked too much when you should have stayed quiet, if you've ever felt drained from explaining yourself to people who don't even care, then this episode is for you. Not just to protect your energy, but to strengthen your character. Because the truth is simple. What you say shapes who you are. And when you speak with intention, the world listens differently. 1. Silence reveals the mind. There's something sacred about silence. Not just the kind that surrounds us in a quiet room, but the kind we choose. The deliberate pause. The moment where we stop ourselves from reacting. It's in that space that we meet ourselves. And most people never reach it. Because they're always speaking, always responding, always explaining. But the truth is this. The more you speak, the less you listen. And not just to others, but to yourself. Silence, when chosen, is not passive. It's active self-awareness. It forces you to slow down and observe not just what's happening around you, but what's happening within. What thoughts are rising? What emotions are tightening your chest? What narrative are you trying to prove? When you hold your tongue, the noise of the world fades, and the noise in your mind becomes louder. That's the first step to real self-control. And that's exactly why it's so difficult. We often mistake loudness for strength. In arguments, in meetings, in relationships, the loudest person seems like the most confident. But that's an illusion. Loudness is often just a mask for insecurity. It's the armor people wear when they fear being misunderstood or unseen. But a person who can sit in silence without feeling the need to explain, correct, or perform, that person is unshakable. That person knows their power doesn't come from convincing anyone. It comes from within. The Stoics understood this deeply. Epictetus said, "Let silence be your general rule, or say only what is necessary and in few words." He wasn't encouraging repression. He was teaching restraint, the kind that comes from strength, not weakness. In Stoicism, silence isn't about avoidance. It's about choosing your moment. It's about realizing that not everything requires your input, and not every opinion deserves your response. The world is filled with noise. Real power is knowing when to subtract your voice from the chaos. But this isn't easy. Silence is uncomfortable for most people. Why? Because it confronts the ego. When someone criticizes you, your first impulse is to defend. When someone misunderstands you, you want to explain. But the discipline of silence asks, who are you trying to prove this to? If your values are intact, if your purpose is clear, then what are you defending? The stronger your sense of self, the less you need to speak. This doesn't mean we never talk. It means we talk from alignment, not from reactivity. Imagine being in a conversation where someone insults you or challenges your beliefs. Instead of reacting, you pause. You take a breath. You let the silence stretch a little longer than usual. That moment may feel tense on the surface, but underneath, something powerful is happening. You are choosing to stay grounded. You are allowing their words to reveal them, not define you. In fact, the more silent you become, the more clearly you begin to see people. You start to notice who speaks from insecurity, who tries to dominate the room, who avoids silence at all costs. You begin to observe patterns not just in others, but in yourself. You catch the moments where you would have interrupted, the need to be right, the fear of being misunderstood, and slowly that awareness begins to change how you show up. You speak less, but with more impact. You say fewer words, but they carry weight, and that weight is what people remember. In a noisy world, silence is not weakness, it's confidence, it's mastery, it's presence, and perhaps most importantly, it's peace. Because when you no longer need to win every argument, explain every detail, or react to every trigger, you free yourself from a prison most people never see. You become less of a performer and more of a witness, not passive, but aware. Not silent because you're afraid, silent because you've already won the battle inside. So the next time you feel the urge to speak, to prove, to correct, pause. Let the silence stretch. Watch what it brings up and ask yourself, is this about clarity or ego? Is this about service or self-preservation? Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing. 2, speak only if it improves the silence. There's a quiet kind of wisdom in this ancient principle. Speak only if it improves the silence. At first glance, it sounds poetic, but when you really live it, you realize how radically it transforms your relationships, your decisions, and your emotional clarity. Because most of what we say is not meant to build, it's meant to fill. And we've been conditioned to believe that silence is awkward, even threatening. But silence is not the enemy, it's the standard. And your words should have to earn their way past it. Think about how many times you've spoken just to make things more comfortable, to break the tension, to fill the space, to avoid being misunderstood. But what if that silence didn't need fixing? What if your value didn't depend on being heard in every moment? The truth is, silence often speaks louder than speech. It reveals emotional control. It demands presence. And when you do speak from that place, people listen. Because you're no longer reacting, you're choosing. When you speak just to say something, you often regret it. But when you speak because something needs to be said, you rarely do. That's the difference between impulse and intention. One is loud and fleeting. The other is calm and unforgettable. The Stoics taught that the wise man speaks because he has something to say, not because he has to say something. And that distinction is everything. In a world filled with noise, opinions, debates, constant updates, your restraint becomes your clarity. You become the one person in the room who doesn't need to dominate the conversation to be respected. You don't need to explain every move, justify every boundary, or argue every opinion. You let the silence speak for you, and when you finally do speak, it has impact. But this is where the real discipline begins. Because learning to speak only when necessary doesn't just mean talking less. It means listening more, listening with full attention, listening not just to respond, but to understand, listening without interrupting, without thinking of what you're going to say next. That kind of listening is rare, and it's a form of respect, both for others and for yourself. So how do you know when your words improve the silence? Ask yourself a few simple questions before speaking. Is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? Is it useful? And perhaps most importantly, is it aligned with who I want to be? Because every sentence you speak is a vote for your identity. You're not just expressing thoughts, you're shaping character. Over time, you either become someone who speaks from clarity or someone who speaks to relieve discomfort. This principle applies especially when emotions are high. When you're angry, frustrated, or hurt, silence becomes even more valuable. In those moments, your words are sharp. They're reactive. And once released, they can't be retrieved. How many relationships have been damaged by a sentence that felt good in the moment, but left a scar for years? One pause could have saved all that. One breath, one refusal to fill the space. It also applies to social validation. So many people speak not because they have something valuable to offer, but because they're afraid of being invisible. They talk more to be liked, to be noticed, to stay relevant. But ironically, the opposite happens. The more you speak without value, the less weight your words carry. But when you speak only when necessary, with precision, intention, and presence, people pay attention. You don't need to chase respect, it finds you. To live by this principle is to reject the pressure to always respond, to embrace the idea that silence is enough, that your worth is not tied to how much you say, but how wisely you choose to say it. It's an internal shift, from needing to be heard to choosing to be meaningful. And that choice rewires your life. So the next time you're about to speak, pause for just a second and ask, is this really better than the silence I'm about to break? If it is, speak with power. If it's not, stay silent and let that silence strengthen you. 3, don't be a slave to reaction. There's a brief space, barely noticeable, between what happens and how you respond. That space is everything. It's the birthplace of your power, your peace, your self-respect. But most people never find it. Why? Because they're not responding. They're reacting. Instantly, emotionally, automatically. And the moment you start living like that, you hand your power to everything around you. Being reactive means your mood belongs to your environment. It means someone's tone can ruin your day. A comment can shake your confidence. A delay can break your focus. That's not strength, that's slavery. It's like being a puppet, and the strings are held by every stranger, every opinion, every little inconvenience that crosses your path. You say things you don't mean. You make decisions you regret. You look back and wonder, why did I let that get to me? It's because in that moment, you weren't in control. Your emotions were. Stoicism teaches us that freedom is not found in what happens, but in how we interpret and respond to what happens. Marcus Aurelius said, if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment. That quote isn't just philosophy, it's survival. It reminds you that your interpretation, not the event, decides your experience. And that means you are never powerless unless you choose to be. But this doesn't mean you suppress how you feel. Stoicism isn't about pretending to be emotionless. It's about being emotionally mature, about recognizing your anger without becoming it, about noticing your fear without obeying it, about seeing your impulse and letting it pass. Reactivity is immediate. Wisdom is delayed. The wise person pauses, they breathe, they observe, and then they choose, not what feels good, but what's aligned with their principles. Every time you react without thinking, you're training your nervous system to be more impulsive. But every time you pause, even for a second, you're building inner space. Space where logic can enter, where perspective can grow, where you can ask, is this worth it? What would the stronger version of me do right now? That space is where transformation begins. And the more you practice it, the easier it gets. You start to notice triggers before they grip you. You start to anticipate your old patterns. You begin to rewrite your own emotional code. You realize that no one can make you feel inferior, angry, or helpless unless you allow it. And that realization is life-changing. Let's be clear, reacting feels good. In the moment, saying the harsh comeback, sending the impulsive message, raising your voice just to feel in control. But it never lasts. What lasts is the regret, the consequences, the internal damage of stepping out of alignment. That's the price of reactivity, and it's never worth it. On the other hand, response is quiet, it's calculated. It doesn't always feel good in the short term, but it feels right afterward. You walk away proud of how you handled it. You preserved your peace, your dignity, your integrity, and that pride builds something stronger than any reaction ever could. It builds character. So the next time something provokes you, a person, a message, a moment of disrespect, remember this. You are not obligated to react. You don't have to defend yourself, correct them, prove your worth. You are allowed to pause, to walk away, to breathe. That is not weakness. That is self-mastery. That is power. 4. Restraint is a superpower. In a world that idolizes expression, it's easy to forget the rare and underrated strength of restraint. We're told to say how we feel, speak our truth, never hold back. But there's another kind of power, quieter, deeper, that comes not from what you say, but from what you choose not to say. And in that space of restraint, you find real control, not over others, but over yourself. Most people equate silence with weakness. They think that if you don't respond, you're being walked on. If you don't argue back, you've lost. But the opposite is true. When you don't rise to every provocation, when you choose not to react, not to vent, not to unload your emotions in the heat of the moment, that's not weakness. That's mastery. It's the kind of control that makes people wonder how you stayed calm and respect you even more because you did. Because let's be honest, it's easy to talk. It's easy to rant, complain, snap back. What's hard is to feel the emotion and still remain silent. What's hard is to have the perfect comeback on your tongue and still swallow it. What's hard is to walk away from a conflict you could have escalated and choose peace instead. That's strength. That's restraint. And it's rare. Restraint doesn't mean suppression. It doesn't mean bottling up your emotions and pretending you're unaffected. It means acknowledging your emotions and still choosing not to let them control your behavior. The Stoics called this apatheia, not indifference, but freedom from being ruled by passion. You feel everything, but you are enslaved by nothing. There's a moment in every conflict, every conversation, every temptation, where you have a choice. You can pour out your feelings and feed the fire, or you can hold your ground, say little, and protect your energy. One choice drains you, the other refines you. People who practice restraint often appear mysterious or even intimidating. Not because they're distant, but because they don't waste words. They don't need to prove anything. Their silence says, I know who I am. Their calm says, I'm not here to entertain drama. That quiet confidence isn't loud, but it's felt. And here's the truth. The more restraint you develop, the less external validation you need. You don't need to be understood all the time. You don't need to be liked by everyone. You don't even need to explain your boundaries. You're content being misunderstood if it means keeping your peace. That's the kind of freedom most people never experience. But it takes practice. It starts in the small moments. When you hold your tongue during a disagreement, when you choose not to send that reactive message, when you let someone else have the last word, not because you lost, but because you've outgrown the need to win. And over time, something beautiful happens. You start to realize how much unnecessary conflict you've avoided, how much energy you've preserved, how many bridges you didn't burn because you exercised restraint when it mattered most. You become a person of depth, someone who speaks less but says more, someone who acts from principle, not from impulse. So the next time you feel the urge to lash out, to over-explain, to confront for the sake of your ego, ask yourself, what would the stronger version of me do? If the answer is to stay silent, then stay silent with pride. Because every time you choose restraint, you're not backing down, you're rising above. 5, your words build or break your identity. Every sentence you speak is not just a reflection of who you are, it's a construction, a brick laid down in the architecture of your identity. And most people don't realize it, but language is not just communication, it's creation. What you say, how you say it, and to whom you say it, all of it shapes how others see you. But more importantly, it shapes how you see yourself. The words you repeat become beliefs. The way you describe yourself, even in casual conversation, becomes a blueprint for your actions. If you constantly say, I'm not good with people, or I always mess up under pressure, or that's just who I am, guess what? That story hardens. It becomes the cage you live in. And even worse, you start to act in ways that confirm it, just to maintain consistency with your identity. This is why the Stoics were so careful with language. They knew that loose speech is not just careless, it's dangerous. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, the things you think about determine the quality of your mind. And the things you say aloud, they echo through your life like ripples in still water. Each word carries weight. Each phrase either reinforces your character or weakens it. And it's not just about self-talk. It's how you speak about others, how you speak in public, how you frame your experiences. Do you constantly complain? Do you speak in absolutes like always and never? Do you speak with sarcasm, self-pity, or passive aggression? Every time you do, you're broadcasting something deeper than your mood. You're revealing your internal landscape. On the other hand, when your words are intentional, when they align with the person you're trying to become, they become tools of transformation. Saying, "I'm working on being more patient," is different from saying, "I have no patience." Saying, "I didn't handle that well, but I'm learning," is a world apart from, "I'm such an idiot." Language has gravity, and your words pull your life in a direction, whether you notice it or not. But here's the real power. You can shift it at any time. You can start editing the script. You can speak with a kind of awareness that turns your mouth into a compass. You can choose words that build discipline, that reinforce boundaries, that honor your truth without tearing others down. That's not just emotional intelligence. That's spiritual maturity. This also changes how others experience you. People instinctively trust someone who speaks with clarity and restraint. They feel safer around someone who doesn't exaggerate, doesn't gossip, doesn't constantly complain. Why? Because that person radiates stability. And in a world filled with noise, instability, and projection, that kind of presence is rare. It's memorable. It makes people lean in when you speak, because they know you don't waste words. And yet this isn't about sounding perfect or pretending to be wise. It's about being congruent, about letting your speech match your values, about making sure that what you say isn't just noise, it's signal. It's signal that you respect yourself enough not to undermine your growth with casual self-sabotage. So start paying attention. Notice the phrases you default to. Catch the moments when you diminish yourself out loud. Observe how your words shape your mood, your confidence, your behavior, and ask yourself, if someone only knew me by the way I speak, who would they believe I am? Because your words don't just describe you, they define you. So speak like the person you're becoming, not like the version you're trying to outgrow. 6. Stop explaining yourself to everyone. There comes a point in your growth where you realize, not everyone deserves access to your reasoning. Not everyone earns the right to your story, your process, your why. And yet, many people go through life constantly explaining themselves. Why they made that decision, why they set that boundary, why they didn't show up, why they walked away. As if they owe the world a justification for every move they make. But they don't. And neither do you. Explaining yourself all the time is exhausting. It stems from a deeper need to be understood, to be validated, to avoid being judged. But here's the truth. People who want to misunderstand you will, no matter how clear you are. And people who truly respect you won't need a long explanation to accept your choices. They'll trust your integrity. They'll trust your silence. That's the difference between needing to be heard and knowing who you are. The Stoics had a clear stance on this. They believed that inner peace comes not from convincing others, but from being aligned within. Epictetus said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." It's a hard teaching, but powerful. Because when you stop explaining yourself, you stop chasing reputation. You stop managing everyone's opinion. You start living for principle, not for applause. That doesn't mean you become arrogant or secretive. It means you become selective. You speak when there's trust. You share when it adds value. You reveal your thoughts not to convince, but to connect, and only when it's mutual. That's what maturity looks like. It's knowing that silence is sometimes more dignified than being understood. Here's the other danger of constant explaining. It weakens your presence. It teaches people that your decisions are open for debate, that your boundaries are negotiable, that your path is up for discussion. And over time, it conditions others to expect justification before they give you respect. But real respect isn't earned through long explanations. It's earned through consistency, clarity, and quiet confidence. You don't have to defend your healing. You don't have to explain why you need space. You don't have to justify walking away from what drains you. Those who see your heart won't demand it. Those who don't won't accept it, no matter how well you phrase it. That's the truth. And the more you explain, the more you stay entangled in other people's perceptions. You start editing your story to make it easier for others to digest. You shrink your truth to avoid conflict. You soften your decisions so they don't feel offended. But every time you do that, you lose a part of your voice. You dilute your clarity. You abandon your authority. So start practicing the discipline of silence, not as avoidance, but as strength. Let your actions speak. Let your energy speak. Let your boundaries speak. And if someone demands an explanation where one isn't owed, remember this: no is a complete sentence. So is, I'm not available. So is, I made that choice for myself. You don't need a paragraph to justify your peace. And when you do speak, speak from sovereignty, not from insecurity. Speak from a place of calm, not from a place of panic. Speak only when your words serve your alignment, not your fear of rejection. Because in the end, you were not born to explain your existence. You were born to live it with integrity. 7. Not everyone deserves your truth. There's a quiet tragedy in sharing your truth with someone who can't hold it. You open your heart, you speak honestly, you reveal something sacred, and instead of being met with care, you're met with dismissal, judgment, or silence. And in that moment, you don't just feel misunderstood, you feel betrayed by your own vulnerability. That's why one of the most important lessons you'll ever learn is this: not everyone deserves your truth. We often treat openness as a moral obligation, as if sharing everything is the highest form of authenticity. But it's not. Authenticity isn't about exposure. It's about alignment. It's about knowing who you are and choosing carefully when, where, and with whom to share it. Because your truth is not a public broadcast. It's a sacred fire, and it must be protected. The Stoics understood this. They taught that emotional strength is not found in how much you share, but in how wisely you guard your inner life. Just because something is true doesn't mean it's meant for everyone. Truth in the wrong hands becomes weaponized. People twist it, use it, mock it, diminish it. Not because your truth is weak, but because they are not strong enough to receive it, and it's not always malicious. Some people just don't have the depth to hold what you carry. They haven't earned your story. They haven't built the trust. They haven't proven they'll treat your words with respect. And yet we keep oversharing, with friends who gossip, partners who invalidate, family members who can't see past their own wounds. Why? Because deep down, we crave connection. We want to be seen, heard, understood. But if you keep giving your truth to people who aren't ready for it, you'll keep getting burned. This doesn't mean you become closed off or emotionally distant. It means you become discerning. You learn the difference between healthy vulnerability and emotional leakage, between sharing to connect and sharing to seek approval. You stop giving people pieces of yourself just to feel less alone, and start giving only where there's mutual depth. Your truth deserves a sacred container, a place where it's met with silence, with listening, with empathy, not interrogation or doubt. And until you find those spaces, it's okay to remain private. It's okay to say, I'm not ready to talk about that. It's okay to keep parts of yourself tucked away, not out of fear, but out of respect. Not everything needs to be said. Not everything needs to be explained. Some things are just yours. And here's what happens when you live this way. You begin to reclaim your energy. You start filtering who gets access. You no longer bleed emotionally for people who never deserve to witness your depth. You stop throwing pearls to those who can't tell the difference between treasure and noise. So ask yourself, who really honors your truth? Who listens with presence, not with a reply already loading in their mind? Who holds space for your complexity without shrinking it down into a simple label? That's who gets your truth. The rest, let them meet your boundaries, your silence, your distance. Because not everyone deserves access to the most sacred parts of you. And when you understand that, you stop confusing being private with being weak, and you start seeing it for what it really is: self-respect. 8. Discipline your speech, internally and externally. Most people think of discipline as something external, controlling what you say to others, biting your tongue, managing how you speak in public. But true discipline in speech begins long before words ever leave your mouth. It starts inside, with how you speak to yourself. Your internal dialogue is the first voice you hear and the one you hear the most. If that voice is critical, chaotic, or reactive, it doesn't matter how carefully you present yourself to the world. Eventually, that inner chaos will bleed into your outer words. And the inverse is also true. If you master your inner speech, your external communication becomes calm, clear, and powerful without effort. The tongue follows the mind. Stoicism teaches us that we are not just responsible for what we say aloud, but for the thoughts we allow to dominate our mental space. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." And that strength shows up in speech. When your mind is disciplined, your mouth doesn't need to run wild to prove a point. You don't over-explain, gossip, or emotionally react. You speak from a center of gravity. Let's start with the internal. How do you speak to yourself when you make a mistake? When you're tired? When you feel insecure or uncertain? For many people, the internal voice becomes their greatest enemy. Harsh, impatient, unforgiving. But here's the paradox. If your self-talk is aggressive, your speech to others will eventually reflect that aggression, even if it's passive, subtle, or disguised as sarcasm. Disciplining your speech internally means creating a climate of respect inside your own mind. It means choosing words that are honest but kind. It means catching yourself when you say things like, "I'm such a failure," or "I always mess this up," and instead asking, "What can I learn from this?" It's not fake positivity, it's mature self-regulation. Now externally, this is where most people collapse. They speak to fill silence, to relieve discomfort, to dominate, or to validate themselves. But speech is not noise, it's intention. Every word you speak is either building something or breaking it. So you must learn to hold your words as tools, not weapons, especially in moments of conflict, especially when emotions are high. Discipline means you don't say the first thing that comes to mind. You wait for the right thing. You don't respond to insult with insult. You don't correct just to be right. You don't spill emotions into spaces that cannot contain them. You develop the strength to withhold until you can deliver with clarity and purpose. And the result? You start to trust yourself. You know you won't betray yourself with impulsive reactions or careless statements. You become someone others trust too. Not because you talk the most, but because when you speak, it's measured, it's real, it has weight, and in a world full of performative words, that kind of speech stands out. So how do you build this discipline? You practice in the small moments. You pause before you speak. You observe your internal dialogue daily. You journal, reflect, reframe. And when you mess up, because you will, you take responsibility not with self-shame, but with self-awareness. Discipline is not about perfection, it's about consistency, repetition, refinement. Because the way you speak to yourself and others is not just about communication, it's about character. And every time you choose restraint over reaction, clarity over chaos, truth over comfort, you're not just managing your speech, you're shaping the person you're becoming. 9, use fewer words with more weight. In a world drowning in conversation, there is a rare kind of strength in speaking less. Not out of fear, not out of passivity, but from the calm confidence that you don't need many words to say something meaningful. In fact, the most powerful statements are usually the shortest. "I understand." "No." "That's enough." When words are few, they're felt more deeply. They land heavier. They stay longer. The Stoics didn't waste breath. Their writings are famously concise, not because they lacked ideas, but because they respected language. They believed that a disciplined mind produces disciplined speech. Seneca said, "Speech that's restrained shows wisdom." And in modern life, that principle couldn't be more relevant. Because in every conversation, every argument, every debate, the person who speaks least but says the most commands the most respect. Using fewer words isn't about being mysterious or manipulative. It's about being intentional. It's realizing that the more you say, the more you risk diluting your message. That when you ramble, explain, justify, overtalk, you start losing the listener. Not because your message isn't important, but because your delivery is scattered. Your words should be like arrows, direct, clear, and necessary. Let's be honest. Many of us talk too much because we fear silence. We fear being misunderstood. We fear that if we don't keep explaining ourselves, people will get the wrong idea. But here's the truth. If someone's going to misunderstand you, they'll do it whether you speak for 5 seconds or 5 minutes. And those who truly understand you don't need paragraphs. They feel your intention in a single sentence. Speaking with weight means taking full responsibility for every word you use. It means replacing noise with presence. It means practicing the art of saying just enough, not to impress, not to perform, but to connect, to impact, to lead. You'll notice something powerful when you begin living this way. People will lean in when you talk, not because you're louder, but because you're deliberate. They'll sense that when you speak, it matters, that you've thought it through, that you're not speaking from emotion or ego, but from clarity. And that makes you a presence to be respected. This discipline also trains your thinking. When you commit to saying less, you begin to think more carefully. You analyze before you speak. You become more precise in how you express yourself. You cut out the filler, the you know, the nervous oversharing, and what's left is sharper, cleaner, stronger. And it applies to every part of life, relationships, leadership, even conflict. In arguments, the person who can stay calm and speak with precision often holds more authority than the one who shouts or rambles. In leadership, the one who communicates clearly, simply, and powerfully inspires more trust than the one who uses flashy language but says little of substance. And in relationships, your ability to express emotion without over-explaining shows maturity, not coldness. So here's a challenge. The next time you feel the need to say more, pause. Ask yourself, can I say this with fewer words and more clarity? Try to trim the excess, strip away the noise. Let your message be strong, not because it's long, but because it's true. Because in the end, it's not how much you say that defines your presence. It's how deeply your words are felt. And when your words carry weight, your silence becomes even more powerful. 10. Speak to build, not to impress. There's a fundamental shift that occurs when you stop using your words to impress people and start using them to build something real. Most conversations today are filled with performance, not presence. People speak to sound intelligent, to seem interesting, to prove their value. But behind all that cleverness is often insecurity, the need to be seen, the need to be praised, the need to be liked, and that need pollutes your speech. When you speak to impress, you exaggerate, you embellish your stories, you dominate conversations just to be remembered. But when you speak to build trust, build clarity, build understanding, your words come from a deeper place. They're not aimed at your own image. They're aimed at something greater than you. And that's when people start to truly listen. The Stoics were never concerned with impressing others. They spoke with simplicity, humility, and focus. Marcus Aurelius, an emperor with more power than almost anyone in history, wrote to himself daily in plain, raw language. Not to sound wise, but to become wise. He understood that speech isn't about performance, it's about principle, that your words should serve your values, not your vanity. So how do you know the difference between speech that builds and speech that seeks applause? You feel it. One leaves you grounded, the other leaves you drained. When you speak from truth, even if it's uncomfortable, there's a sense of peace afterward. But when you speak just to impress, there's tension, a need for reaction, a craving for validation. Building through speech means speaking with honesty even when it's not flashy. It means asking thoughtful questions instead of waiting to talk about yourself. It means listening more than speaking. And when you do speak, choosing words that serve the moment, not your ego. It's not about being passive, it's about being intentional. This principle becomes especially important in leadership, in relationships, in teaching, in influence. People don't follow the loudest voice, they follow the clearest one. They don't remember how brilliant you sounded, they remember how you made them feel. Did your words create understanding, peace, insight, or were they just noise dressed in confidence? And here's what's ironic. When you stop trying to impress others with your words, you become more impressive. People feel your authenticity. They respect your calm. They trust your presence. You stop chasing attention and start attracting respect, not by trying harder, but by aligning deeper. This mindset also protects you from manipulation, because when you're not trying to perform, you're harder to provoke. You're less reactive. You speak from purpose, not pressure. You don't respond to bait. You don't fall into unnecessary debates. You don't feel the need to win every conversation. You're there to connect, not compete. So the next time you feel the urge to speak in a way that garners attention, stop. Ask yourself, am I speaking to be seen or to create something meaningful? Am I adding value or just adding noise? That one moment of awareness can change everything, because ultimately your voice isn't just for you. It's a tool for connection, for truth, for growth. And when you use it to build, not to impress, you create something far more powerful than admiration. You create impact. 11. Practice the art of the pause. In a world that moves too fast, speaks too loudly, and reacts too quickly, the pause becomes an act of quiet rebellion. It's simple, but it's not easy. Pausing before you speak requires strength. It demands presence. It calls on you to interrupt your own reflexes, to hold back your tongue when your ego wants control. But in that moment of stillness, a different kind of power emerges. Not the power to dominate, but the power to direct. Pausing doesn't mean weakness or hesitation. It means you're not a slave to impulse. It means you're not reacting on autopilot. It means you're allowing yourself to choose instead of explode. That's rare. That's disciplined. That's stoic. Seneca wrote, "The greatest remedy for anger is delay." He wasn't just speaking about rage. He was speaking about the space that gives you freedom. The gap between stimulus and response where your highest self gets to intervene. How many times have you said something you regretted? Not because you meant it, but because you didn't pause. 1 second could have saved a relationship, preserved your dignity, prevented a conflict. 1 second. But you rushed, you reacted. You spoke before you saw clearly. That's the cost of living without the pause. And that cost is steep. When you practice pausing, even for just a breath, you create space for wisdom to enter. You get to ask yourself, what am I really feeling right now? Is this anger or is it insecurity? Is this a truth I need to speak or just a reaction I want to release? That space makes all the difference between a conversation that heals and a conversation that breaks. And it's not just about emotional moments. Even in everyday speech, the pause has power. It gives your words rhythm. It gives your listener time to absorb. It gives your message gravity. Great speakers, great thinkers, great leaders, they all master the pause because they understand that silence is not empty. It's pregnant with meaning. It builds anticipation. It shows control. But perhaps the most transformative part of the pause is how it trains your mind. The more you pause before speaking, the more you become aware of your patterns. You start to notice your emotional triggers. You catch the sarcasm before it escapes. You sense the tension building, and instead of releasing it recklessly, you ground yourself in it. That awareness changes everything. This is especially important in relationships. The pause allows you to hear what's really being said, not just the words, but the emotion underneath. It gives you the chance to respond from compassion, not ego. It turns arguments into understanding. It teaches you to see, not just react. So how do you practice this in real life? Start small. Before replying to a message, pause. Before responding in a conversation, pause. Before making a point in a meeting, pause. Just breathe. Let the silence stretch longer than usual. You'll feel the urge to fill it, but don't. Let it work for you. And with time, the pause becomes your power. It becomes the mark of your self-mastery. People will feel it. They'll notice your presence. They'll sense that you don't rush your words, because your words matter. So the next time you're on the edge of speaking, stop. Even if just for a second. Give yourself the gift of clarity. Let your words come from choice, not compulsion, because a moment of silence today can save you 1,000 words tomorrow. 12. What you don't say reveals who you are. In a time when everyone is speaking, online, in meetings, and passing moments filled with noise, What you don't say begins to speak louder. There's a silent kind of authority that surrounds someone who chooses not to say everything they think, feel, or know. It's not secrecy. It's not repression. It's intentionality. It's the understanding that self-control isn't just about what you say. It's about what you leave unsaid. Your silence reveals your strength because it shows you don't need to correct every misunderstanding. You don't need to win every argument. You don't need to defend your name in every room where it's mentioned. You're not running from truth. You're choosing your battles. You're choosing your peace. And that choice is not cowardice. It's courage. The Stoics mastered this art. They believed that the truly wise person has nothing to prove, and therefore nothing to explain. Epictetus reminded his students that it is not things themselves that disturb us, but our opinions about them. In the same way, it is not words alone that define us, but the wisdom to know when they are unnecessary. What you don't say tells others how secure you are. It shows that you are not living to be understood. You're living in alignment with your values. You're not desperate for attention. You're not thirsty for validation. You're rooted, grounded, focused. And that quiet focus is more powerful than any clever words could ever be. But this discipline isn't just for how you deal with others. It's for how you deal with yourself. When you learn not to speak every harsh thought you have about yourself, when you learn to leave space between your self-judgment and your self-compassion, you start to become whole. You start to build the kind of inner environment that allows your life to rise from silence, not from internal noise. And here's the paradox. The less you feel the need to speak, the more your presence speaks for you. People can feel it. They sense your clarity, your calm, your weight. They may not understand you fully, but they respect that you're not trying to be understood by everyone, that you've outgrown the need to constantly be seen. This is not to say that your voice isn't important. It is. Your truth matters. Your story matters. But there is wisdom in knowing that not every truth needs to be spoken to everyone. Not every feeling needs to be shared in the moment. Not every opinion needs to be expressed out loud. Sometimes silence honors your truth better than explanation ever could. So the next time you feel the pull to respond, to prove, to unload, pause. Let your silence speak. Let your restraint say, I know who I am. Let the absence of words become your message. Because in the end, what you don't say, with grace, with dignity, with self-respect, will say more about you than any perfectly crafted sentence ever could.